Hi everyone, today I am very excited to finally be reviewing Peace and Turmoil by Elliot Brooks. Most of you probably know her from her YouTube channel, which is also called Elliot Brooks. I want to start off with just a few disclaimers that I follow her on YouTube. I'm a subscriber of her channel and that I've had some interaction with her through comments and email. But that does not mean that I'm not going to keep this review as honest as possible. I also wanted to quickly mention that I wanted to have this video up before the actual book came out, but I just had way too many things going on, a lot of chaos in my life, but I'm not going to get into any of the details or make excuses, but just letting you guys know that this video isn't going up at the time that I wanted it to. I think at the point that I reached out to her, the book was also gonna be released only like within the next 2 weeks, and I didn't even realize that. So I definitely didn't even have time to finish the book within that time. It took me a while. As soon as I get into the review, you'll probably figure out why. And also I want to apologize if I'm mispronouncing anything throughout this video, which I'm probably going to do. There isn't like an appendix or a glossary or anything like that that lets us know how things are pronounced. And as all of us know, the English language is not a phonetic language, so we can only try our best sometimes. So yeah, let's just get started. I'm going to start off this review by covering plot. Just want to give a quick synopsis of the book, or I'm going to try because it is pretty complicated. So anyway, there's two main, they're either worlds or continents. They're divided by an ocean. So we have Eve, where some of the most powerful people live, and then we have Abram, which is basically the rest of the world in this universe that Elliot has created. So on Eve, or the people that are from Eve, as far as we've been introduced, contain some of the most powerful people. And then on Abram, we get more of the general population. And there's a lot of countries or nations within that. And I would say the common or the average person on Abram does not know about the people on Eve, or if Eve even exists. I was kind of getting the vibes a little bit that Eve is kind of a more holy place, or sort of like a paradise. But that's information that I feel like we probably will be given in the next book, the sequel to Peace and Turmoil. So yeah, I don't have a lot of information to give on Eve, other than one of the main perspectives we see is her name is Zodia, and compared to the other three point of views, she is the most powerful. But we don't get introduced to her right in the beginning. But basically along the way, she sort of has this mission, and so she goes to Abram to kind of see that mission is completed. And that's kind of her tie to everything else going on. Because obviously all the characters that are in Abram from the very beginning are a lot more intertwined. But yeah, I just wanted to start off with her because everything that she is, why she's so powerful, etc., I feel like we've just like barely scratched the surface with her, which is a little bit of a bummer, but I can be patient. And I'm pretty confident that in the second book, we're going to see a lot more of her, and her story, her arc is just going to blow us out of the water. I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful about that. So yeah, and then on Abram, the other three main point of views that we see are Dietrich, who is the Prince of Sadie, and then we have Guinevere, who is the Princess of Zenith, and we also have Roland, who is royalty in Mysidia. He is the firstborn to the king, but not quite the heir. And the book does get into why that is. So basically, Guinevere and Roland are guardians to these powerful amulets, weapons, tools. And in the book, 3 are mentioned. Guinevere is the guardian to the amulet of Eve. Roland is the guardian to the dagger of Eve. And then there's somebody on the actual continent or world of Eve who has the shield of Eve. So basically, as the story progresses, it's kind of revealed that almost every person, every party, every nation involved is after one of these 3 artifacts. All 3 have the ability to grant nations incredible powers. So you can imagine the political charge behind motivations. And this is a very politically charged book. So yeah, basically we have those 3 amulets driving most of the motivations. So now I want to talk a little bit about the magic system. Even though this is what I would consider primarily a political thriller, there's also a lot of fantasy involved. However, I don't think that the magic system has played a big part yet. I'm not saying that it won't, but I think that just like the character of Zodia, we've kind of barely scratched the surface. I think it's been a much more minor aspect driving some of the plot along. In terms of playing a major part and really affecting the story, we have yet to see that. So the way it's described is that people obviously use magic, and it's also explained that everybody has the ability to use magic, and it's not without consequence, which is something that I really loved. But another great point that it brings up is that even though everyone is capable, not everyone becomes proficient, because it's compared to learning an instrument. So I think also most people have the ability to learn an instrument, if not everybody, but how good you become is sort of where the line is drawn. How much you practice and your natural ability or artistic gifts, all that. But in this world, it seems like no matter who you are, if you have the discipline and the practice, you're going to be very proficient. So everyone who uses magic is basically drawing from their own what are called auroras. I see it as kind of people's spirits or souls or elements of their souls or auras. However you want to refer to it, it's kind of how I thought about it. But they do all have different colors. So depending on what color you draw from will depend on the ability that you're using. So I think, for example, if you pull from a red aura, that's going to produce fire. Purple is electricity. So different things, I think. And then more specifically, there's black auroras, which people can use. I'm not quite sure of the difference, touched or called weapons. So these weapons that they manifest from their auroras are basically, as soon as you stop concentrating, then they disappear. You have to focus on manifesting the weapon, whether it's a bow and arrow or a sword. And also another thing that was interesting, you can't manifest whatever you want. There's like a scene where one of the characters, I think it was Dietrich, he's like, why can't I draw at my auroras to create a fork? And then it's explained that only certain weapons, from ancient times were the ones chosen to be able to be drawn. So there's not a limitlessness to the magic. And like I was saying, it's very costly to use your auroras, whether you're using elemental magic or to draw any of these weapons. So it's not like for the average person, there's not a great advantage to using these things over, regular firearms. But again, I think that's something that we're going to see sort of more flourish, because we did get a taste of people who seem like they're very, very, very proficient at magic. But, they were in the book this much. Again, I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, but this is a very hard book to sort of really break down and criticize, because I think a lot of it is really going to depend on how the second book turns out. So anything that has not been explained, I want to give it the chance to be explained, whether Elliot chooses to do that in the sequel or if there's going to be a third book. I don't know how many books are planned for this series, or if it's just going to be a duology. That's not information that I have. But just based on what I read, my experience reading this, everything felt carefully crafted. So that's why I have really high hopes. This is a book that feels like a lot of hard work went into it. So I don't think that we're being led astray here. While we've gotten sort of a bigger picture, I think there's a much bigger picture that we have yet to see. So now I want to get a little bit into the writing style. So I did have an issue. I don't even know if I would consider it an issue, but an issue that seems to be common in most fantasy books. It did have a slow beginning. Yes, there's four main perspectives or point of views, but there's so many more characters than that. There's a lot of characters. So as we're getting introduced to this world, it's kind of a lot to take in at first. That makes it have a pretty slow beginning as we're trying to grasp and understand everything that's being thrown at us. It's a lot of information. However, that's not something I see as, very negative. I'm kind of a little bit used to that, I guess, or it's simply not something that bothers me a whole lot. The beginning of most books I'll read really carefully and make sure that I'm understanding who is who and where they are in relation to everyone else. So I guess as a reader, sometimes you have to do a little bit of your own research, study what's going on a little bit to understand it better, because not every author is going to make it easy peasy for you. I guess I don't think this is a bubblegum read. So just to compare it to books that I've read more recently, because I feel like comparing always gives you sort of an idea of what you're getting yourself into. I have recently read A Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I finished last year. I don't think that this book is on that level of, what you would call a slow beginning. It's definitely not as dense. There's a lot more world building going on in those books than in Peace and Turmoil. But what I did see in Elliot's writing style, there were some sentences that felt a little metaphorical or flowery, kind of what you see in more classics, which again, I don't mind. So yeah, even though it wasn't quite as dense as something like A Journey to the Center of the Earth or Lord of the Rings, it was also not as simplistic in writing style as two of the Sanderson books that I read recently, which were Elantris or Warbreaker. I would say that it's similar to Elantris in the sense that it's politically charged and there's not a ton of world building. Warbreaker does kind of have a lot more world building going on. But in terms of sentence structures, at least in these two Sanderson books that I've read, his sentences are pretty short, very straightforward, and using very simple language. So his books tend to read more like a commercial book. You can sit there and read it very easily, which if you prefer that type of writing style, you might not enjoy Peace and Turmoil. But like I said, it's not quite to the level of some classics. It's still easier than that. But yeah, those are the only two Sanderson books that I've read, so I don't know if his writing style is similar, for example, in Mistborn or The Way of Kings. But yeah, I think that your enjoyment of Peace and Turmoil is going to greatly depend on where your preferences lie. Like me, for example, I'm someone who doesn't mind Tolkien, but I also don't mind Sanderson. I find enjoyment for different reasons. Sanderson probably, so far, is not my preference, but I enjoy it for what it is. I hope that will help some of you in deciding if this is the book for you. So getting a little bit more into world building, I already mentioned this book isn't heavy on it, which again, I could go both ways. I don't mind really dense world building, but if an author chooses not to focus on world building, I'm also okay with that. I kind of love imagining my own worlds without a lot of description. I know a lot of people don't, so also just keep that in mind. For me, as long as the world building or the lack thereof doesn't interfere with how I'm understanding the story, I think it's fine. For the most part, I understood perfectly what was going on the whole time while reading it. There was just one scene that I could think of where I was really confused. So in this scene, it was Guinevere who, out of nowhere, she's suddenly under a building that's collapsing. So previously, we were not told that she was near a building or anything like that. So it's like, whoa, let me place where she is and okay, let me wrap my head around it. So I kind of had to reread it to get the bigger picture. So I feel like just her being near a building and maybe describing the building a little bit because of the action that was about to happen would have been useful to know beforehand instead of just throwing that out there. But other than that, I think that's the only scene that I remember specifically where the lack of world building interfered with my understanding of what was going on and of the action. That's one thing I forgot to mention is that there's a lot of action in this book, and I thought it was done pretty well. Aside from that scene, I didn't have trouble following along. It is her first book, so there's going to be some errors. It's not the end of the world. That's how we learn. One thing that I did really appreciate is that Elliot took the time to make drawings of a lot of the characters, and in the book, like before a chapter, we get to see inserts, there was a character that she made artistic, which is cool. So this character draws people when she sees them or she finds something interesting about them. So we get to see from her sketchbook. We also get to see letters between different characters. So we get little insights here and there. And I also haven't mentioned that there's what are called fiends. They're like monsters, and some of them, I guess, are dragons. And I believe Elliot Brooks has a friend. I don't know her name, but I'm going to find that information and to link it in the description, who drew the monster art. Yeah, I believe it was Elliot drawing the characters and her friend or this other artist doing the monster art, which was also fantastic to see. So sometimes, even though, you know, there's not a lot of world building in an environmental sense, we do get a lot of world building with the characters and the fiends and the dragons. And I feel like Elliot played it to her advantage that she is artistic with drawing. At the end of the day, writing is an art form. And if she chose not to describe everything with the written word, maybe because she knew that she would be drawing a lot of these things or having people draw them, which, I mean, I don't know. I just don't see a big problem with it. Another thing is that we're given a map at the beginning of the book, and I did read it as an ebook, so I wasn't necessarily going back and forth between the map and wherever I was. It's just not that easy to do when you go the ebook route. However, Elliot would give the cardinals north, east, west, south. I don't know, I always felt very centered. I knew exactly where we were. She, like at the beginning of each chapter, she also has the name of the country that we're in and a little section of the map. So I was never confused as to where we were, what character we were following, and where they were in relation to everybody else. I thought that was always straightforward and it was great. Moving on to characters, I know I've already gone over who the four main point of views were, but I just want to talk about them as a whole and how they were presented to us. I thought all of them were very human and relatable. Another thing that I really loved and appreciated about this book is that nothing is ever one-sided. There's alliances and betrayals alike that happen that you would never expect. So even when you're sitting there and you're reading the book and you're starting to have biased thoughts, then it's like the author suddenly reminds you, like, hey, remember this other character? Here is their point of view, their motivations, and they're not totally in the wrong either. So even when one character thinks that they're doing good, that they're doing the right thing, and that somebody else is wrong, we're going to also get to see their motivations behind things and see that maybe they're not entirely in the wrong either. So I just think that's a very realistic way to go about it. Most books that I've read, honestly, are on one side of things, and that's all we get. And that's just not the way things are in real life. People don't always take a step back to see why somebody else is doing whatever they're doing if we don't agree. I just thought that was handled really well. And again, I mean, not every single motivation was explained, but again, there's a second book coming, so we'll just have to wait and see if that stuff is revealed. At the end of the video, I'm going to give this a rating, but I feel like it can change depending on how the second book goes. I feel like that's where this book stands. It's just 100% set up for there to be a sequel. There's no other way around it. But anyway, I'm not going to go super in depth about all the characters. Like I mentioned before, there are way too many of them, but there are just a few points that I want to hit. The first is probably my real negative criticism of the book. There's 3 female characters, Natalia, Breline, and Fiona, and they're all kind of set up as femme fatales, which is one of my least favorite tropes, when a female is using her sexuality to sort of manipulate people and things around her. And I'm not saying that all 3 ladies, that's all they were, because they did have their own strengths. For example, Breline is very good with medicine and healing people. And then we have Natalia, who is extremely smart, pretty unlikable, but very smart politically. And Fiona, who is a pretty savvy businesswoman. It's just that, in my opinion, having 3 female characters when it could have just been one of them using her sexuality to her advantage, I don't know. I just felt like it was a little bit unnecessary. That's just a personal thing. It bothered me a little bit, but it's not like that one thing ruins the whole book for me by any means. It's just femme fatale, one of my least favorite tropes, and I saw it 3 times. So yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit bothered. Hopefully though, we'll get to see them be a lot more layered and have to rely on that a lot less in the future. Another interesting thing to note, which I thought was fascinating, is that Elliot actually put regional phenotypes on the characters. So basically, depending on where a character was from, each country had their own designated eye color, skin color, and hair color. So if you have golden skin with green eyes and dark hair, they can tell that you're from Sadie. If you have blonde hair, blue eyes, light skin, they can tell that you're from Mysidia. I don't remember all of them quite well, but it is something that I found fascinating. So it was really awesome to see some realistic diversity. I mean, not necessarily realistic in the biology of our world, but realistic enough in the worlds that Elliot created. Elliot created her own universe, so her rules, but she set them up nicely. If you create rules within your own universe, you're good. All right, so I think I pretty much covered everything that I wanted or needed to cover. I think I'm probably forgetting at least 1 or 2 things, but that's okay. So my final rating as of right now is a 4.25 stars. I think ultimately once the sequel is released, it'll be somewhere between 4 or 4.5 stars, depending on how more information is given and how everything ties up. But overall, it was just a very, very solid debut novel in my opinion. It's one of my favorite books that I've picked up this year so far. It's very enjoyable. I had so much fun reading it. It's not without faults, of course. Most books aren't, but it's so enjoyable that that's kind of what, you know, pushed it over a 4 stars for me. I think for anybody that enjoys fantasy and political intrigue, if you're willing to take on the challenge, I think it's still easy enough to follow despite some of the intricacies. If you can get through the hump of maybe the first 100 pages or so, I don't think that you'll be disappointed. And I really do think that this is going to be one of those books that, well, I guess me personally, that I'll enjoy even more on reread, to catch some of the things that maybe I missed, and I'll especially want to reread it before the sequel. I don't know, I wholeheartedly believe that Elliot Brooks did something wonderful here. I hope that she doesn't stop writing, because if she can write this well for her first book, yeah, she just went big. She tackled on, I think it's over 600 pages, and created a complex, you know, political fantasy world. So just a really good job. I'm really impressed. Anyway, I think that's going to be all for today. If any of you have read Peace and Turmoil, please, absolutely, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Or if you watch Elliot Brooks, I hope my video has helped you in some way in deciding whether or not you want to read it or not. In any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.